Hello, I'm David J. Harrison, author of the mind-bending dark thriller Recursion. I'm going to try and do justice to a passage from my late father's fantasy novel. So this is The Secret of the Scroll by D. J. Harrison, Chapter 1. The faint thud as an unfortunate bird dropped lifelessly onto the roof dragged Lona's consciousness back to her body. She was naked, filthy, hungry, and thirsty. Her physical discomfort was a testament to the number of days she'd been squatting on the floor of her hut. For 2 long and arduous years she'd been subjecting herself to the same tortuous regime. Spells, incantations, prayers and rituals, followed by long periods sitting on the floor and projecting her entreaties into the earth beneath. She was searching for the vanished deity who had abandoned all her kind. Gods don't die, she kept telling herself. My God still exists. She felt the vestige of divine power within herself as a living legacy and a promise of what would come if she succeeded in attracting her God's attention. At last, something had responded. She felt faint echoes. In reply, her spirit had descended deeper into oblivion than ever before, until the tiny thread of humanity that tethered it to her body had been stretched almost to breaking point. The contents of a bowl of tepid water disappeared in one desperate gulp. Breathing deeply, she reinforced the wards of protection that surrounded her to prevent anyone from approaching. Should any of the citizens of Bounty observe her present state, they would immediately conclude that she was a witch and drag her off to be hanged. Worse than the threat of discovery was the prospect that being disturbed could destroy many months of painstaking work. Sustained by her intake of fluid, she returned to dredge the depths of darkness. It was like fishing in deep mud below a black river. Evidence of a presence was limited to half-imagined ripples, but she knew something was there. It wasn't her God, she could be sure of that, but it was something she could use, something from another realm that would serve her purpose in this world. She ignored the pleadings of her physical body and sank deeper. Whatever was down there had recognized her probing. What she was feeling wasn't the automatic thrash of a semi-animate beast, but a clear, conscious flash of understanding. The first glimmer she'd encountered in all the long years of trying. It tasted like curiosity piqued, smelt like the attraction of a composed mind to a new experience, a mind unlike hers, but one that weighed possibilities and pondered on outcomes. If this was fishing, she was dangling herself on the end of the line. It felt to her more like being tethered to a stake in a predator-filled jungle. Attracting attention, difficult and time-consuming as it had been, was only the prelude. Her excitement fed energy into her system, and she recognized that the really dangerous part of her task was beginning. It was as if she'd observed a bubble rising from the ooze to leave an iridescent slick, betraying what lay below. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd experienced before. Incantations rolled around her mind in complex rhythms. Invitations, promises, temptations. She paraded her naked vulnerability to the denizen of the dark sludge. Begged, pleaded, promised pleasure. Abundant, never-ceasing ecstasy. Fleshy delights that only a human could offer. Whatever it was, it came closer. Ripples disturbed the deep levels of her consciousness. Voices began to sound in her mind. More incantations, bargains to be struck. You scratch my back, I'll do whatever it is that you desire. I'll invent delights that you haven't even thought of. This is your chance. Join me in my world, and I'll give it all to you. But first, the pact. The binding. A small agreement, but a necessary one. Something and nothing. It responded, tasted the offered inducements, accepted the bargain. She felt its unworldly power, and she exulted. As she strode through Bounty, she wondered how she'd managed to remain so long in this isolated town without going completely mad. It had been her work, of course. Long hours of tedium, flecked with intense danger, had seen her through. Contact with the residents had been kept to the minimum required for survival. Now she had tethered her demon and could unleash it on the unsuspecting king. But first, she'd have to travel to the capital and find her husband and fellow conspirator. Travelling alone was out of the question, though. A woman without a man to protect her was asking for trouble in this misogynistic world. 2 mercenaries swaggered past her, brandishing oversized weapons. The man dragging the heavy 2-handed sword paused to look at her. She watched his eyes as they traversed the length of her body. Her stomach twisted as he licked his lips and raised a sweaty hand to paw at her chest. "You don't want to do that," Lone whispered into his mind while reaching inside him and squeezing. His mouth opened wordlessly as he fought for breath. She tried hard to resist the impulse to crush his windpipe, squash his heart into pulp, and leave him writhing in the agonizing death his callous disrespect deserved. It was a close thing, but she had succeeded in restraining herself by reasoning that his companion was likely to need the same treatment, and then the good citizens of Bounty would have even more reason to proclaim her a witch. That would inconvenience her greatly. She'd have to fight her way out, kill more people, and risk being pursued on her way back to civilization. Her work here was done, better to leave quietly. But to do that she needed male company, without which she would stand out like a tall poppy in a field of stubble. These 2 morons had seemed her only option until the big stranger wandered into town. "That's Tyrant," one of the women whispered, eliciting an exaggerated intake of breath from the others. "Tyrant?" Lone asked. The woman gave her a surprised look. "He's from Gort. He's famous. Kills people if they so much as look at him. They've tried to hang him lots of times, but they never succeeded." The swordsman's colour changed from purple to red as she released her hold on his throat. His eyes turned away, and Lona followed them towards the large, unkempt fellow heading their way. The swordsman gripped his weapon tightly, and his partner gave him a look of encouragement. "That man has taken your money. Now you have the chance to take it back." Lona shot the idea into the man's mind, then walked away to mingle with a group of women, heavily laden with vegetables, who had paused to take in the impending confrontation. Lona watched the big man as he ambled towards the mercenaries. If he were a mighty warrior, he didn't look the part. More like an oversized vagabond with little purpose and fewer possessions. A man to avoid, perhaps, but only because there could be no possible advantage to any form of engagement. The suggestion she'd made to her 2 thugs would be powerful enough, though, and bloody conflict was inevitable. The 2 men blocking Tyrant's path looked as if they meant it. One was fat and grubby, dressed in smelly rags and cradling a longsword in need of a good clean. His scrawny companion carried a long-handled pike with a wicked-looking hook at the pointy end. Tyrant gave them a hard stare. They both glowered back at him. Tyrant tried to smile and spread his hands to show they were free of any dangerous weapons. The men gripped their ironmongery tighter and bared their teeth. Tyrant tried to step backwards. They advanced. "Hold on," Tyrant said. "What are we trying to achieve here?" 2 puzzled looks gradually dissolved as the words were digested. "You," the pikeman said enigmatically. "Me?" Tyrant said. "Me what? Be more specific." "We've come for you," Pikeman explained. "So you know who I am, then?" Tyrant's question seemed to tax their brains because they looked at each other as if seeking guidance. "You've got our money, and we want it back." Pikeman came up with an answer as if he'd plucked it out of the air. "All I have are the clothes I stand in and a crust of bread in my pocket. You're welcome to that if you want it. I'm afraid it's more mould than bread, but you might be able to scrape it clean." The puzzled look returned, and the men took another step closer. "Hold on," Tyrant said. "Before you do anything rash, you should know that I'm Tyrant." "We don't care what your name is," Pikeman said. His companion nodded, as if to lend additional weight to the remark. "Then you should know I've got nothing worth stealing, and you're only going to get yourselves hurt." I don't see how, Pikeman smirked. We've got a pike and a sword. It's you that's going to get hurt. I don't need a sword, Tyrant said. I have my reputation. That's enough. Now get lost. Tyrant took a deep breath. This was the trouble with the more remote reaches of the kingdom. Back in Gort, everyone knew him, and apart from an occasional drunken brawl, he was given a wide berth. As for the weapons you carry, let me give you the benefit of my experience. A pike can be really useful if you're being attacked by a man on a horse. That's what they were designed for, prodding horses. Once you've skewered the horse, though, it becomes something of a liability. Think about it. Whoever's on the horse isn't going to be happy, is he? On the contrary, he's not going to take kindly to you prodding a hole in his beloved steed. When there's no horse involved, a pike is worse than useless. Too long, too unwieldy. I don't know why you bother dragging it around with you. The potential altercation had attracted quite a crowd, with more onlookers arriving every minute. Tyrant found himself addressing not only the men confronting him, but also a gaggle of unwashed faces. Unwashed apart from one. There was a woman standing front and centre whose dark eyes were ablaze with excitement, presumably at the prospect of pikemen trying his luck. He found himself fascinated by her face. It was not only clean, but unblemished. No poxmarks, no boils, no pimples, not even the obligatory wart to add distinction. Her cheeks were full, smooth, and free of slap marks and bruises. It was a wonder how she'd managed to get through to middle age without any marks to denote the passage of time. She was unusual, extremely attractive, and Tyrant searched for a more appropriate epithet and came up with the perfect one. Dangerous. Get on with it, a gruff voice shouted from the back, though his impatience didn't appear to be shared by the majority of the assembly, who seemed content to stand silently and let the tension build. Before we do that, Tyrant said, I need to say something about that big sword your friend is dragging around. If I'm honest, it's no more use than your pike. It's too heavy, by far. You'd be hard put to hit anything more mobile than a tree. Look, lads, there's no shame in backing down when you realise that you're already beaten. After all, I am Tyrant. Many have put me to the test, most of them younger, fitter and better equipped than you. I don't need to add to my already awesome reputation, so let's call it a draw and go our separate ways. For a moment, Tyrant felt that his wise, calming words were having the desired effect. Then his eyes were inevitably drawn back to the dark-haired woman, who returned his gaze with what felt like mild amusement. The crowd began to voice their mounting frustration. They'd turned up to watch a fight, and weren't leaving until they'd seen one. As if in response, Pikeman swung his weapon in a wide arc and then thrust it savagely in Tyrant's direction. Tyrant grabbed the pike with his left hand and pulled it towards him. Pikeman, clinging onto his weapon, practically launched himself onto Tyrant's right fist, which, judging from the pain it caused to his hand, connected with enough force to fell a horse. Grabbing the semi-conscious Pikeman by the scruff of his neck, Tyrant twisted him around so that his body provided protection from his accomplice, who would raise his enormous sword above his head and was about to strike. The possession of the pike was being barely contested, its owner having lost interest on receipt of that blow to the face. Tyrant swung the unwieldy object and struck the swordsman's shoulder. This upset the swordsman's already precarious balance, and he toppled backwards, sword still in the raised position. Having deposited Pikeman in a heap on top of his fallen ally, Tyrant stood on the sword hand until it obligingly released its grip. There you are. Now, do you understand what I've been trying to tell you? These are hard and dangerous times. Try something like this again, and you're going to end up dead. Most men in my position would have killed you to improve their reputation, so you're unfortunate that I already have more than enough of a reputation to protect me against all but the very stupid. A classification that you have to admit is appropriate for the two of you. He picked up the sword and hefted it. The pommel was loose and the blade was notched and rusty. It was ridiculously heavy, even for his strong arms to wield. He brought it down hard onto the pike, and it broke into two pieces while the wooden pole remained intact. Swordsman's face clouded with a look that might have been disappointment, but ought to have been embarrassment. Discarding what was left of the sword, he ignored the voices demanding blood, and he pushed his way through the crowd. Both Secret of the Scroll and Recursion are available in bookshops or online. Search for DJ Harrison, for my father, and for me, David J. Harrison. Thanks for listening.